Thank you guys for all coming on. This is kind of second episode. We were talking about that season one, second episode. Last week was on big data and machine learning. Stephen did like a good job on that. And I told him I learned a lot. I did some more research afterwards. Stephen's the head of our advanced technology team, amazing programmer, developer, but really good teacher. He's been teaching a lot of our internal team all these different concepts. So thanks, Stephen, for joining this week, and I'll just hand it off to you.
All right, thanks, Curling. Yeah, so today we're going to cover the topic of kind of mobile first ideas, which is something that's come about the last probably decade, really big in a way to for companies to reach customers, kind of a theory of being mobile first or having a mobile first philosophy behind what you do. So that's kind of what we're going to be covering today. For those of you that may have joined Zoom and did not use the Eventbrite email or that link, if you guys want to be part of the email list for our future tech school events, make sure you go and sign up for the Eventbrite, because when you sign up, we do get your email, so we can add you to that list. So just something to keep in mind for those of you that may have just used the Zoom link as well, if you want to be notified of future tech school events that we do. All right. So, like I said, today we're going to cover mobile first, which is kind of this philosophy that's kind of come about last decade or so, really big as a way to as a theory or an approach for companies to use. So today we're going to be talking about kind of this mobile revolution that's happened over the last few decades. We're going to talk about mobile first in two different formats. First, as kind of this design principle that is used as an approach for UI UX and how to represent your product and service. And then we'll talk about it as more of an overarching theme of a business strategy. And we'll give some examples towards the end, and how different companies have used the mobile first, how they've adopted kind of this mobile first strategy, and how that's worked out for them as well. And then we'll talk about it and kind of touch on a few things of what the future holds as far as kind of this mobile first idea and ideology. So we'll talk about kind of this mobile revolution. So as you guys may have noticed, one of the things that's a big part of our lives every day is that phone in our pocket, right? So life on this planet has become increasingly mobile. You probably do more with your phone than you used to 5 or 10 years ago. Phones have kind of changed a lot of the way that we communicate, learn, do business much more, from the advance of the iPhone to now all the smartphones that are available today and all the fun stuff you can do with them. So kind of some interesting statistics here. About 90% of all American adults who own a phone of some kind, and about a little over 80% of them are said to own a smartphone, right? So, and this doesn't account the other types of ways we may be able to access the internet through a laptop or through a tablet or other ways as well. But this is just kind of mobile, because we kind of take our phone just about everywhere we go, or most of us do. And today, or as of about a year ago, about half of all web traffic, it's probably more now, is mobile, right? Just on mobile. And about 25% or more people that access the web do it only from their phone, only from their mobile device, which is kind of crazy, right? So we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that. So this kind of great shift that we've talked about and people using more and more mobile devices has, disrupted a lot of industries, forced a lot of companies to rethink how they do business, just because people are more unknowingly relying on their phones for a lot of things in their lives, from relationships, access to to finances, health, well-being, different things, sometimes without even realizing it, without even realizing the impact that little device has on you. And so the web in and of itself over the past few decades is kind of broken out of this computer-shaped box that we used to know it as, right? It's not just a desktop. It's not just a laptop anymore. It's, accessing the web from anywhere, really, as long as you have a smartphone. And, odds are a lot of the information we just covered, if you have some sort of smartphone in your pocket, much of this probably isn't a big surprise to you, right? You're like, okay, well, I notice a lot of people using their phones, and it, it's easy to see this set of impact in your everyday life. So what in the world does it mean to be mobile first, and what kind of impact does that have on business? So we're going to dive into mobile first as this design principle first. So this term mobile first was first introduced by someone by the name of Luke in a book back in 2009. So this is when it really kind of was put into words and really thought of as an idea that people could use for a product or service, or to implement in their business. And it addressed a lot of the problems of transitioning from desktop to mobile web design, and a lot of things in that realm. I talked about how teams and organizations should adapt design strategies, things like what actions they might take on a desktop versus some sort of mobile web design. The input, right? Input meaning the use of a keyboard versus actually touch and play on a smartphone. Think of like that. And then layouts, right? The difference in the display and what those screens might look like. And so this kind of was denoted as a design approach, right? So okay, how can we approach this in a manner that would be really effective to think about mobile as something that's coming on and may be useful for you to use in your business? So there's two ways that they kind of thought about this, and one that really kind of is one that's used today. So the traditional design, when they first started thinking about mobile, was to think about mobile as this secondary thing, right? It was just this aftermath of, okay, our business is, has a website, deals with customers in our traditional manner, and this mobile thing that people use, this smartphone, is, they'll use it, but it'll never get very big. And so they just thought of it as kind of this secondary downsized version of the same thing. And this caused a lot of problems when teams would later find out there was numerous things they built into their website or their web service or whatever that worked great on a desktop computer, but didn't work that well in mobile because there was a lot of limitations, right? You couldn't do as much or do stuff in the same manner. And so they started to think about how they could really approach this and be effective in how they were going to think about mobile design. And so the first approach was this thing called graceful degradation. So it arose from this need to design a function for as many things as possible, right? So you could take advantage of new tech without excluding some old user setups. You'd start with kind of this fully functional website, and then you'd start scaling it back gradually to be able to work on smaller and smaller and more limited devices, right? So think of starting on your desktop. Okay, now we're going to make sure that we can scale back and make this work effective on a tablet, and then on a smartphone, and then maybe on a smaller device. So you end up removing content, removing features. This was, you think about them removing Flash support from websites. That's kind of an example here. So things become, functional in a smaller and smaller system, or a more simpler system, which ultimately led them to another idea that is the way that a lot of things are approached today. And that idea is called progressive enhancement. So this idea comes from, putting your best foot forward on that mobile platform first and then building up from there. So you're providing users with, okay, we have minimal screen real estate, our screens are smaller, processing power is more limited. There's a lot, we're in a smaller box, and there's only a certain amount of things we can do, but let's make the most of what we have and make everything work as intended. So if you can make this amazing experience or amazing web experience on this smaller device, then as the device gets bigger and you have more capabilities, more enhancements, all these other things that are features that are now available to you because you're using a bigger device and has more features and more things tied to it, then a lot of those constraints kind of melt away, and so you can add more features as you go. So this is, of course, just the opposite of what we just talked about, the graceful degradation. So in the end, progressive enhancement kind of won in those two conflicting different approaches, and that's what is used a lot today. So when you start from a desktop, you tend to take advantage of all it has to offer. You end up building a great product and you have great tech behind it, but then you realize that there's a lot of things that you built into that website or built into that product or service that doesn't really scale down to mobile, right? Because limited processing, smaller screen size, it makes it a little more difficult. And so you might end up with watered down mobile products. This has happened with a few companies. And it may feel like, okay, their product or service on my smartphone feels kind of like this afterthought, something that was thought of after the fact and they didn't really put a whole lot of effort into it versus, what you see maybe when you go on your desktop computer and go to their website. And then the alternative, that progressive enhancement, when you start with that super lean, impressive product, you've trimmed it down kind of to its core components that work very well on a mobile device. And you know that whatever device that you use beyond that is going to have that or more capabilities, right? And so you're always going to have this same impressive product, and it can only get better from there. So I'm going to stop here. Does anyone have any questions? I don't want to get too far and kind of neglect the questions. So.
Yeah, I think I even add that at the beginning. I forgot, Stephen. If you have questions like we did last week, if you can just put it on the Zoom chat, that would be great. I know we have a lot of people who possibly are working on mobile here as startups. So you guys even ask questions even more detailed to even your product or where you're at. But just put it on the Zoom chat. So far, we don't have any. Stephen, I have some previous questions from some other startups that gave me questions ahead of time, but I'll save those for later.
Okay, yeah. Just like Curling said, if you guys have questions, you can enter them in the chat, and I'll try to stop every few slides before the end, and maybe if there's some outstanding questions you guys have, or we can just answer them at the end, whatever works. So. All right, so let's kind of continue on our journey here. So what does this mean for all the content that you have, all your web content and things like that? So when we talk about graceful degradation, all that content is served up initially. It works very well on that large platform, right? On that desktop computer per se. And when you try to convert that into a mobile, well, you might have to remove things. You might have to ignore content, right? You might have to remove that Flash plugin, right? Because it's not relevant or it doesn't work on that smaller device. So content is, being loaded whether it's needed or not. It's often associated with, slower speeds and stuff like that with websites that may not necessarily have to do with the network latency or how fast your network connection is, but it more has to do with the approach that they used with building that website or web service. Now, the other hand, with progressive enhancement, you start with kind of this bare essentials, and everything works well on the mobile device. Well, as things get more processing power, more capabilities, it's only going to get that or faster, right? You're going to still end up with a snappier, really, lagless experience. and then additional resources are loaded as needed, right? So you might find when you load up your Amazon app that there's a lot of capabilities within, you know, uh, within the app on your phone, and then you go on a desktop computer and you might find a capability that didn't exist on your phone, but now was, you know, available to you because you're on a desktop and you're on, you know, Amazon.com, right? So those are some things to think about that you may notice in different products or services that you use. So that in turn is of course mobile first. So progressive enhancement has kind of evolved into, you know, terminology wise, mobile first, because you're starting with mobile. So you know, build a product, you know, have great tech, and then you realize that none of it may scale down to mobile. That was kind of the first view, and then, you know, we talked about it leading to a watered down product that ultimately feels like an afterthought. And this is kind of a common story of a lot of companies over the past, you know, 2 or 3 decades, as the internet has kind of evolved, and how they've, you know, modified their approach from having this watered down product to fully becoming, okay, we need to adopt this mobile first strategy to be able to, you know, mitigate these problems from happening in the future. So they start with some super lean, you know, product that works great on mobile, and then, you know, they work up from there, you know, making it even more robust as they go along. So mobile, of course, applies to a lot of things, web applications, anything that really can be, you know, accessed via a smartphone. Ultimately, the big kind of positive of this is it reduces kind of this distance to your customer, right? We know that there's a lot of, it's really easy to access your customer when they're carrying around a smartphone every day, and your product or service can be available through that smartphone. And on top of it, it creates a more personalized interactions because of the data you're able to gather from a smartphone versus, you know, other applications, or I should say the data we're able to gather today versus what we were able to gather, you know, 10 years ago or 15 years ago, right? So this has been a great source of data to also help people personalize things even further. And another thing that's kind of come out of this is other products or services that, you know, either you may use directly or companies may use were also impacted as things became more and more mobile first. So search engine rankings were something to keep in mind. So with an update, you know, Google could essentially, you know, ban your website or, you know, move your website down the rankings of its search engine if it wasn't optimized for mobile devices. So this is something that, you know, could come into play if you had just ignored, you know, kind of that mobile first strategy, and kind of move forward without it too. So mobile first is becoming more than just kind of this simple design principle that it used to be 10 or 15 years ago. And it's more becoming a way of people do business. It's kind of that standard of, okay, we better make something work on mobile because everyone carries around a smartphone nowadays, right? So why on earth would we go mobile first? We'll dive into that a little more. So reasons that have come about, you know, companies becoming more mobile first. They have additional competitive edge. Mobile adoption has become kind of this winning strategy for retailers, right? Easy access to customers. You can buy a lot of things with, you know, a single click or 2 clicks, right? So online retailers like e-commerce sites like Amazon have been really effective in making the customer experience just awesome for mobile. You've also had increased customer reach. Think of like a simplified product distribution. It's really, we talked about it being easier to reach customers than having them physically have to come into a store or an office every time they want to be able to access your product or service. There's an obvious, you know, long-term return there, because you're able to, people have an easier time accessing your product or service, right? If you can make it easier for them, you're saving them time, you're saving them money, whatever that may be. It's an obvious positive on that side. And then the other thing is customer engagement and retention. So your smartphone is often one of the first things you reach for, and you wake up, you know, turn off your alarm, check your social media, whatever you might do in the morning, email. And it may be the last thing you look at before you go to bed. This is the case for a lot of people, just how integrated it is within our lives. Some other things to think about is new revenue channels have come from this as well. We have things like paid product, in-app purchases, gamification elements, right? Things that did not exist too much before people started thinking mobile first. And then it's also become this unmatched data source. All the data that's being collected because we have access to a personal computer in our pocket. We're able to gain a lot more customer insights. How people use their phone, how they use our product or service, and that data is being used to offer this more personalized experience, right? And we talked about a lot of that data last week when we talked about big data. So this kind of just builds on that in another way that data is used. And then there's also an improved customer experience. We talked about things being more convenient. It makes a way more convenient way to solve a day-to-day task if you can just search, pull up a search engine. If you're trying to, let's say, change the oil filter in your car, well, you can Google search it and find a video on YouTube, right? Just from your phone. Which, things like that, offering a more convenient way to solve a task or to use your product or service improves customer loyalty because, hey, they have such an easy access to what you offer. Another thing to think about is, as we talk about this also kind of coincides with becoming agile and agile methodologies. So mobile first businesses are more agile, more flexible because they ultimately end up reacting to challenges a lot quicker, a lot faster. Like we talked about them having kind of this scaled down version of the product, a very limited version that works great on a mobile device. So they're able to be more flexible if new features, things come about, in phones, desktops, whatever they can take advantage of, for their technology. So, these new technologies and tools ultimately allow people to take advantage of them quicker and be kind of the step ahead of competitors who can't do that. So this seems kind of like an indispensable business strategy. We've talked so much about, the pros or the pros here. So where do we start with this, and how do we actually make a business mobile first? What kind of things do we have to think about, and what steps do we have to take along the way? So we will we'll go into that. So there's also kind of this downside here to think about when you do go mobile first. Before we get into kind of the steps you take to make a company mobile first, or things to think about, we have to think about the downside. So ultimately, when you start out, you're hit over the head with all these constraints, right? There's only so much you can do within a phone versus, let's say, a desktop computer or something more, bigger or has a lot more features. So right off the bat, you're like, okay, we have limited screen space, we have fewer resources, we have a lot more headaches to deal with. And this ultimately isn't comfortable or ideal for, let's say, a developer to develop an app, or a developer to develop a website or something like that, right? You give them a list of constraints and like, okay, well, I have to deal with all these different things. So it may be very difficult to start mobile, right? The starting is ultimately sometimes the most difficult part. And there are plenty of articles on the internet talking about, different developers' struggles with this, from people trying to build applications, people trying to build websites, things like that, and all the struggles they've had to deal with because of the constraints of trying to be mobile first. And, ultimately it comes down to that sometimes you have to give up a little bit of comfort in the short term. And, it's going to be more difficult in the short term in creating that initial mobile first, product or service. But in the long term, there's much more benefits, and it ends up, those benefits definitely outweigh all the struggles you may have gone through at the beginning. And that's kind of the consensus of a lot of companies that have adapted mobile first and found that out. So I'm going to stop again for questions before I go through this part here. Is there any other questions?
I don't see anything on the chat piece. But yeah, I'll save the question from the other startups to after, Stephen.
Okay. All right.
I got about four questions from the other startups.
Okay. So I'll go into building a business strategy, and then after that, we're going to talk about a couple examples of, just to give you guys some kind of use cases of companies that have used kind of a mobile first strategy and how they've used it. So if you were to start mobile first, the first thing to do is start internally. All right. So if you're, you know, a decision maker at a company, you have to kind of assess your current mobile maturity level. You know, where are we at? You know, is your current business process in line with a mobile first strategy already, or is it, you know, really kind of somewhere out in left field? So if you're stuck in a business strategy that's fully fixed in the 1990s per se, when everyone else is in 2020 and everyone else is mobile first, it's going to be very difficult. But knowing where you exist and how you know, kind of where your mobile maturity level is, you know, kind of that first step. You know, and then you think about optimizing existing products for mobile. Do we already have customer facing products that we can, you know, put online or make accessible through, you know, that handy dandy smartphone? You know, do our products cater to a mobile audience? Does it even make sense for us to make it available on a smartphone? And then do we need to make changes to our backend systems and the infrastructure that already exists? So these are kind of the first questions that you may have to ask yourself. The second step is to kind of embrace and invest, right? So we start embracing that agile methodology, you know, being more flexible and being more mobile first. So mobile first and agile methodologies tend to go hand in hand in the development world. That iterative software approach tends to be really perfect or really awesome for building kind of that lean mobile experience. And then you start investing in new mobile products, right? So if Facebook and Google can turn multi-billion-dollar businesses into something that's mobile first, then, you know, it can't be much harder for you, right? So nowadays, the more a business can be digitized, ultimately the better. And so these are things to think about as, you know, companies start embracing and investing more in mobile first. Now, step three is to think about the customer. So you start adopting and looking for new channels for customer service, things that may have not existed because now you're thinking about a different avenue to connect with your customer via that smartphone, right? So mobile first ultimately equals customer first because it's an avenue for you to better serve your customers. You know, social media, chat, virtual assistants, you know, things like that have become integral parts of a mobile first strategy. An example of this is, you know, you can now order a Domino's pizza by tweeting, right? That didn't exist, you know, 10 years ago. But as Domino's adopted more of a mobile first strategy, they said, okay, how can we best serve our customers if they have a smartphone in their pocket and make it easier for them to order a pizza? And Twitter was popular at the time, so, you know, a tweet made the most sense. And then because of this, you learn to kind of leverage that customer data. So as more and more people use your product or service on a mobile device, you end up with a huge data pool of all this data, which ultimately means a more competitive advantage because now you know more about your customers, what they do, what they like, what they don't like, behavior, habits, all this fun stuff. And so, you know, data like geolocation, activity preferences, purchasing behavior, personal information, you know, things like that allow you to customize that experience for your customer and make it more valuable to them. And now that you better understand your customers, this is kind of where that data and analytics, a lot of the stuff that we talked about in that big data talk kind of come in. And then step number four, something kind of that some companies have got to and some companies have not got to, is also the Internet of Things. So among other opportunities that may come about with the being mobile first is the use of smart devices. So if it makes sense for you to do this, some companies have seamlessly kind of connected dozens of other devices to kind of bridge the gap between different parts of our everyday life. You know, how many things can you think of that have Alexa tied into them now, right? It isn't just your phone, it's also, you know, your car, and anywhere that you can plug in, one of those Amazon Echoes, right? So as an example of another example of this, a lot of companies have used smartwatches as kind of a gateway other than just a phone. Businesses can offer kind of this more meaningful customer experience for people that use smartwatches on a daily basis. And so we're going to dive into a few examples here of companies that have gone mobile first and how that's impacted and what they do. And then after this, we'll end it with some questions and kind of open the floor for you guys if you guys have questions or comments to make too. So as a first example, over 90% of Facebook's ad revenue as of about a year ago comes from mobile. So that's just the amount of people that use their app, use Facebook via a mobile web browser and things like that. So a lot of the money they make and a lot of the interaction they have with their customers or with their their customer base comes from mobile. Target's another example. So Target has been able to use data and analytics to their advantage to get a lot of insight into the way people purchase things, behavior, and things like that they were able to do first and foremost online, and able to translate that into being able to have a mobile payment system and do a lot of things mobile via an app and via your website on your phone. Another example of this was Sephora. So one of the cool things that they did was they said, okay, we're going to use augmented reality so somebody can essentially try on a product through Facebook Messenger without having to physically go to the store, which saves people time and allows people to try on clothes without having to physically take the time to go to the store and search for it. Okay, they may have it in your size, they may not, and people who spent a lot of time doing that, this was a really cool feature that they were able to do because of their mobile first strategy. IKEA kind of dived into using augmented reality to also give kind of this virtual experience of designing your home interior using their products and services. So that was kind of a cool thing that they did mobile first. Starbucks, they have a digital loyalty system for using their mobile app, making purchases and paying for things mobily, right? So mobile order and pay feature allows people to order these drinks in advance so it's ready for you. And they have kind of this loyalty program for people who use that system all the time. And then we also talked about Amazon, before, that e-commerce app, the Amazon App Store, things that may or may not already exist on your phone. And then they've also played around with this cashierless store concept where as long as you have a phone in your pocket, you can, walk in and out without ever having to deal with a cashier, which is also another thing to think about in their mobile first strategy. And then Walmart's also been huge. A lot of their business, a lot of the transactions that take place do happen online, and you might see commercials related to their website or purchasing things online. One of the things their CEO has said in the past is that their company processes a huge amount of data per day. The data that they get on people's purchasing behavior, their decisions they make, how they use their products and things like that, which has allowed them to better serve their customers in the long run, which is pretty cool. So the future is ultimately pretty bright when we talk about mobile. It's a way of thinking that's shifting the world around us. Heck, it's caused a lot of things to be thought about, and a lot of cascading effects in a lot of industries. It's also caused this radical shift in marketing called mobile first marketing as well. And some companies have even gone as far as being mobile only, where they only have only do business or only interact with their customers via something that's mobile. And new technologies that come about with 5G are going to further blur that line between what's conventional Wi-Fi and mobile networks and actually where that limitation lies, or if it even exists at all. And so it makes the world even more mobile. So just some final thoughts here, and then we'll kind of wrap up and leave it open for questions. So some things to take away. So just to kind of reiterate, mobile first is revolutionizing a lot of the world, and just about every industry and business domain has been affected in some way, shape, or form. Even ones that were really resistant in the past to other technological changes. And now just having a mobile app is not enough, right? So just having the app, you kind of have to go to the point of having that mobile first viewpoint and figuring out how that actually affects your business and taking those ideas into account in your strategy. Something that the executive chairman of Alphabet, Eric Schmidt, stated back in 2010, so 10 years ago, he said mobile will ultimately be the way we provision most of your services. The way I like to put it is the answer should always be mobile first. You should always put your best team and your best app on your mobile app. And this was something that happened 10 years ago when there was a lot of people who didn't think mobile first, or, okay, this is just this new technology. It'll kind of phase out and people will continue with the same approach they had. And you have the executive chairman of a multi-billion-dollar company, Alphabet, stating, yeah, this is here to stay. This is serious. And about 10 years later, that statement is still kind of truer than ever. Building a modern, building a competitive business means making mobile kind of this top priority for years to come, because it's so ingrained in what we do and how we live our lives. And that's what we got today. So thank you, guys. We will open it up for questions.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Yeah, we have a question from one of the startups from the current cohort. I'll read it verbatim. It says, I was kind of dwelling on the downsides of mobile apps because I plan on using a mobile app as one of my tools in my business. I've also known that some companies provide limited information in their app, and they still have this option where you kind of can visit the full site. Would you say that this is a useful tool? Have this kind of have these dual information, some having this kind of full site and actually having this kind of mobile aspect too. Hope I explain that correctly. But you have any thoughts on that, Stephen?
I think my thought on that would be you have to really analyze who your customers are and how they're going to use your product or service. One of the people that we've had speak before, Alex Waters, he's talked a lot about customer discovery and getting feedback from your customers and how to go about that. But one of the things to think about is if your product or service makes more sense on a mobile app, or a majority of people, let's say, of your clients, 95% of your clients have iPhones, then maybe it's best for you to just start with an iOS app. But if you're not sure about that, or let's say that you're not sure how much your clientele, they may use iPhones, they may use Androids, they may use whatever, maybe it makes more sense for you to go the web route so that it's available on any device or medium, and build it up from there. So we talked about the progressive enhancement for a website to go from mobile to website. So maybe that approach is better. But from my experience and what I've heard, it kind of depends. It depends on who your clients are, what business you're doing, and what makes sense, right? It may make more sense for you to have a mobile component in your business strategy, but it also may make sense for you to just become completely mobile, which some companies have done with their product or service. So that's kind of those are some thoughts to think about on that.
That's great. Now we have a lot. Always at Tech School, we always have mentors online too. And Sam, do you have any initial feedback? Let's see what Sam has. And then we also.
Oh yeah. In terms of answering that question, I'm not 100% sure what I would say. I think customer discovery is a good suggestion that Stephen made. But I also want to remind people that a couple things. One is what we saw in terms of the evolution of the cloud-based business, and those who were successfully able to transfer old ideas into a cloud environment became kind of those unicorn companies. So they took products that didn't exist in the cloud, made them into cloud products and were successful. I think that opportunity still exists in some cases in the mobile first world. There are probably lots of products that exist only online through a web browser. And I think those who take advantage of putting them into a mobile first have the opportunity to kind of repeat what people did in the cloud space. It's just kind of things of opportunity. So I think there's still a lot of opportunities here to go mobile first world with old products that people have been doing a traditional way and need to move to that mobile device.
That's good. And I know the cohort, some of them are looking at this mobile first and looking at so many things. I think that this has been a great topic, and we can even delve more into it. Steve, I had a couple of questions from other groups too. One thing was actually groups were actually saying, like, what's the best way they can actually kind of test out some of their kind of like, getting these kind of people to look at their apps, or best way to actually test things out, things of that nature. Do you have any kind of advice on some of that?
I would say go back to customer discovery. I mean, there might be people that whether it be a company or a group of people or whatever, that may be able to test your product or service. But it seems like the best way to get feedback to help you, let's say, build out your service would be to have people, beta test your website, beta test your mobile app, right? We've done this in the past with Fokcus with things like Test Flight, which allowed us to release that app to certain people and have people beta test it and things like that. But if you can get somebody who is in that demographic of people that's going to use your product or service in the long run, then those are probably the best people to get feedback from, because they'll be able to tell you, okay, that was seamless, or yeah, I really didn't like that. That was really hard to get to that feature, or to use this, or to, X, Y, and Z. So that's probably my feedback on that question.
No, thanks. The next one has to do, Stephen, with this specifically for like the App Store, iOS, stuff like that. Like, is there a way to kind of speed up submitting your app and getting it on the App Store? A lot of people are like, okay, I'm ready. I want to get on. Is there any advice on that?
Well, Curling, you mentioned something really good about this. Why don't you take that question?
Oh yeah, sure. I think one thing I've learned from the startups too is that they have an idea, they want to do an MVP and get it out there and have it there. So it's always this kind of rapid development type of aspect of it. And it works one way when you're actually doing it, maybe a website, right? It's not really a submission process for a website. But for apps like going on iOS or going on the App Store or going on Google Play, there is a submission process. And then we actually had a person, Andrew Kura from Apple, talk to our previous cohort about that. I think that's what one of the questions came up. And he actually said that they have, for the App Store, a lot of them get rejected just because they didn't really look at the iOS guideline, like submission process. Like there's some simple things that they just didn't add in there. So he was just saying, pretty much have your team and have whoever's going to lead it go over that, kind of go some of those submission guidelines line by line and check them off. And he said that would save a lot of kind of going back and forth and getting rejected. So that was just one way of speeding that process up, is just actually following the guidelines first. And that's one, Stephen. I have one more too. I think there was one that I'll try combine this piece. One, people are saying, should I start with iOS or Android first? If they were talking about doing this native app. Let's go back to that customer discovery piece that Stephen talked about. One thing I was just going to add on that is that if you understand, there was a group that was doing this kind of fashion tech company. They really wanted actually to promote, and they found out that their customers were at least women, it's 18 to 35, and they found out a lot of them were using iOS. So there was a lot of women using iOS. So we kind of looked at some of this kind of customer discovery data, and from that they decided to launch mobile first, iOS first, and then they did Android. So they did some of that customer discovery and looked at that, and that helped determine to do iOS first or Android, and then later on they went to all of the different platforms. So that was when I knew offhand, Stephen. And then I think the last one was just what's ways that you can leverage mobile platforms that are already out there, like WhatsApp and Facebook. I think you gave a really good example though with using the dominoes with Twitter, but do you have any other feedback for that? Leveraging other mobile platform, that was pretty much it.
Yeah, another kind of use case with that, I would say, is I think the company is called Wish. So they sell products through kind of like an eBay style marketplace, and part of their mobile first strategy was that they were going to spend millions and millions of dollars of their marketing budget, or almost like 95% of their marketing budget, on Facebook ads. And so they wanted to just kind of go very niche and say, we're going to have our product and service be kind of this thing that was advertised, kind of solely on Facebook, knowing that there's billions of people that access Facebook daily through a mobile device. And that allowed them to ultimately become a billion-dollar company because of just knowing that they were leveraging kind of this mobile-first strategy. So that might be, that's an example I got.
That's great. And I'm looking at the chat. Is there any more questions offhand? I think I covered the ones that's from the other cohort. Sam, I always have a resident, professor. Sam, you want to add anything to any experience you've seen with any of the startups you interacted with on mobile or anything of that nature?
Well, I always like to share that when you think about the iPhone, came out in 2007. It's just been a little over 10 years, and think of how the world has changed because of that mobile first mentality, and what industries have changed. And we got some of the largest startups in the world who benefited from this evolution. So you got Uber and Twitter, all these things, communication, entertainment, travel, all those things are transitioning to mobile first. So it's crazy to think that was only about just over 10 years ago.
I know.
The world has changed quite drastically in those 10 years. And a lot of traditional businesses got disrupted by it because they weren't prepared. And I think, again, like I said, there's still opportunity in some spaces to find places where the mobile first mentality can benefit and change the way in which the business model works in that industry.
Good point. Yeah, I was thinking about that. Like, groups like Uber can do it without having that mobile platform. So mobile platform kind of help get them more traction, and it pretty much was their foundation. So that's the thing I always find that's intriguing. I think for startups too that are listening to, always look at certain technologies, the ones that are kind of trending, and seeing how you can always maybe ride that wave, right? And the people look at it, blockchain, this new technology that comes out, and see if you can use that technology to create some sort of competitive advantage. I think that's always good. So you can think about other technologies too. I think that's why it's important for tech school, that at least we're exposing people to different things and seeing how you can use it as an opportunity. I think that's the one goal of tech school is to see that. Thanks for Stephen, for this is a great talk. I love all the use cases on that piece. What I think the next step on here for the next episode is going to be actually more on leadership in tech companies too. We'll have my friend on next week on that. And so I think it's gonna be fun. It'll be a little different format. We're gonna do a little more fireside style, and then we'll have we'll have some other fun talks on some of that things. Sam, anything you want to announce or anything else?
No, just to restate what Steven said, if you didn't get a chance to sign up on the Eventbrite link, or if you haven't got the emails recently, just do that, or shoot me an email, or shoot Curling an email or something, and then we can keep you updated on what's going on for the tech school, tech talks.
Yeah. Innovation Hub too. This is always good stuff. Thanks for the cohort early on, coming on early for us to talk. And Steven, thank you again.
Thank you guys for listening in.
All right. Okay, take care, everybody. Be safe.